As the Stanley Cup playoffs continue on ESPN, anything is possible. So the decorations could get a little out of hand. And a city could get a new landmark. Could a kraken arise? Could the storm surge? Could it happen for the first time? Could it happen again? Yeah, that could happen. That is playoff hockey. The Stanley Cup playoffs continue on ESPN.
So, you open Google Chrome on your phone, you're rushing to buy tickets to a concert that all your friends are going to. Picture yourself now, crowd surfing to the front, being invited onto the stage, backstage the world tour, and before you know it, you're dancing in Tokyo. Wait, what? 3 tickets left? It's a good thing your saved payment details autofill quickly and securely. There's no place like Chrome. Download Google Chrome on your phone.
Well, the 2023 season is technically just a hair under 4 months away, but the schedule is out. We're entering phase 2 of voluntary workouts over at the Bengals facility, and a lot is happening, and it just feels like forever ago that the schedule came out. But here we are, a new week, a new day, a new Monday, as we reset things going into the offseason. As we mentioned, phase 2 workouts, looking ahead to OTAs and where the roster stands. We're going to break all that down right here and much more. Welcome into another edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad, glad to be back with you, along with Mike Neislick and Andrew Gillis. And Andrew, I know you were, I have to ask you, just to really open the podcast up. I know I saved this for the end, but I know you were in Baltimore the last couple days. I saw you were at an Orioles game. I'm just curious, is that stadium nice? The Baltimore Orioles Stadium? Camden Yards, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I was in town for a wedding. I went to their game on Saturday against the Pirates. It's hard for me to say because I haven't been to too many major league parks. I've never been to PNC Park in Pittsburgh, and I know people talk about that a lot. It's kind of one of the nicer ones. I've never been to Coors Field in Denver. There's a couple parks out there that are, relatively, Wrigley, Fenway. I've never been to those places. But Camden is, it's up there with one of my favorite sporting venues I've ever been to. It's so nice. It's like got a classic look. Camden's outstanding. I've talked to people who are from Pittsburgh who think that it's the best stadium in Major League Baseball, which is kind of sacrilege to say considering what they have in Pittsburgh. But yeah, it's an outstanding park. I heavily recommend it. I don't think the Orioles will be playing on November 15th or whatever day that the Bengals head to Baltimore. But if you're listening to this and you're a Bengals fan, try to make it out to Camden Yards at some point. If you're a baseball fan, it's a really nice stadium.
Yeah, I have to cross that off my bucket list. I've only been to Great American Ballpark, obviously, because I grew up close to Cincinnati. Forget the name of the stadium in Atlanta, but the new one, I've been there. I've been at the, not the newest stadium in Arlington, Texas, where the Rangers play, but the one before that. So, 3, I think that's pretty much it. I've been in front of Wrigley, but I have not been inside of it. Mike, you're a Chicagoan. I'm just curious, I don't think I've ever asked you, are you a White Sox guy or a Cubs guy?
I grew up a White Sox fan.
Oh, okay. So did you grow up on the south side of Chicago?
No, I grew up in the suburbs, but just gravitated towards them.
So is it not like geographically divided as far as like Cubs fans are in this section, White Sox fans are in this section? Because I know Wrigley's more north, right? Towards like the suburbs north of downtown. Wrigleyville is what it's called.
Yeah, it's not about geography. No, it's just about lineage and things like that. Who your family rooted for usually plays a role.
Lineage. Were you at the World Series in 2005?
I was Game 1.
No way. Oh man, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm actually kind of jealous.
That's the team that everybody that's one of those teams where you look back at sports history and you're like, this team is really, really good, and nobody ever really gives them credit for it. I mean, that team was a buzzsaw in 2005. Holy God. Yeah. Scott Podsednik was on that team. Aaron Rowan was on that team.
Jermaine Dye, I think, was the MVP.
Yeah, that team, I remember watching that team, and they were so fun to watch.
Yeah, man. No, I vividly remember that. I was really not into baseball until a couple years later, but I do remember hearing about how good they were. But that is crazy because that was the year after the Red Sox ended their curse. I think the White Sox had like an 87, 88-year curse. So weird how in back-to-back years, baseball's two of their longest curses die at that point. Cubs had to wait an extra 10 years, but yeah, I don't know. I just obviously this is a football podcast, but I saw you were there, Andrew, and I was like, that is a nice stadium. Good recommendation there. Likewise to you, Mike. That's pretty cool. I really didn't know much about the fact that you were a White Sox fan. I thought you were a Cubs fan. I just automatically assume most people are Cubs fans in Chicago, but I guess it's like a NL Central bias. I don't know. But anyhow, jumping into business. So we talked about we've talked a lot about this on the podcast, like the different positional battles, what to expect in training camp. Of course, training camp is still a good 2-ish months away, but I think we can kind of look at where the roster is now, what positions are the most interesting, where we think there'll be the most movement. And I really want to start under center. No, I'm not talking about Joe Burrow. He's going to be there for a very, very long time. But, of course, Trevor Siemian, the newest guy in town in Cincinnati, the newest addition to the Bengals. We thought Jake Browning was going to be the guy under center. Obviously, they added Trevor Siemian. And I know we kind of did like our sort of defense, offense, better, worse, or the same after the draft. But looking at the quarterback room, what do you think happens here? Do you think Jake Browning has a legitimate chance to compete with Trevor Siemian? Or is Trevor Siemian going to come in and say, hey, young guy, I've been doing this for 9 years. I know a thing or two about this. Step aside.
But I think it's, in terms of roster competitions, it's probably one of the most open on the roster. I think, you can look at a couple different spots and say, oh, well, this spot's up for grabs. It's technically anybody's job. And you can say that about cornerback where, DJ Turner can come in and start over Cam Taylor-Britt, whether you think that's likely or unlikely or whatever. Like, it just kind of feels like, it's really hard for some guys to come in. You think of the rookies like Miles Murphy. You think of guys that are coming in. Like, it's going to be hard for Chase Brown to be running back 1 in week 1. So I don't know. I think that this is actually a genuine competition. This kind of feels like a situation where Joe Burrow plays. I mean, Joe's. I mean, good Lord, he's probably not going to play much at all in the preseason, if at all. And, I know he's had injuries in the last couple of years, so we'll see. That's going to be an interesting topic. But that feels like a situation where it comes down to how do these two guys do in the preseason and, how do you do in live game action? And that's, I think, going to decide it. But, yeah, I think it's wide open right now. I think I would lean Siemian just as a hunch. I think that you would – probably want to lean more veteran, but if Browning comes in and kind of proves that he can play well, you can keep him for longer under contract. You can, he's a younger player, you would hope the trajectory is still up for him. So I lean Siemian, but I think it's wide open.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of the 53-man roster, I think they both, both are going to be, one's going to be on the 53-man roster and that whoever wins the job, and then the other will be on the practice squad. Right. I can't see them going into the season without at least 3 quarterbacks. I tend to agree that the experience will win out and then Browning will remain on the practice squad. They've elevated him for a game, I think, each of the last 2 seasons. Is that right? Or just at least last season?
Last season, not the year before.
So, I think both of them are fine in terms of making the roster, with one on the practice squad.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it was last year. Brandon Allen won the job. He was on the active roster. Jake Browning was on the practice squad, except when he had to get his 2 paychecks towards the end of the year where he didn't even really play. So I think that's just going to be the case. Keep one of those guys other on the practice squad. And like Andrew said, it's wide open. I know Siemian's done this for a while, but Jake Browning is eager. He wants his shot. He wants his chance. So that'll be an interesting battle to watch. Then when you move over behind under center, of course, we know that the competition to replace Samaje Perine is really going to boil down to Chase Brown or Travion Williams. And then I'd imagine whoever doesn't win that battle will be the RB3. But then you also have the RB4 because, the Bengals had 4 running backs on their active roster last year. Mixon, Perine, Williams, and Chris Evans. But they have another running back, undrafted free agent, Calvin Tyler Jr. I mean, if you think about it, we talked about how vulnerable Chris Evans is. I know that's going to be the least of people's worries as far as like who's going to be that RB4, but I mean, no matter what happens with Brown and Evans, regardless of who wins that job, that'll be a conversation I think for down the road. Like, does Tyler have a shot to really unseat Chris Evans and take that RB4 spot as an undrafted free agent rookie?
Well, I think it depends kind of on how he does in camp, obviously. I mean, you kind of look at his production. He is a smaller guy. He's only 5'8". He does have a little bit of size to him. He weighs 208 pounds, or at least that's what he's listed at. He was, productive in the last 2 years of college at Utah State. I don't know. I think that if you're going to go Mixon and Brown are going to make the team. You would assume Trayvon's going to make the team. And I just don't know, when you kind of look at, Tyler's receiving stats, he had 26 catches in the last 2 years combined. That doesn't exactly scream, versatility. And if you're going to have a guy who's fourth, it's going to come down to special teams and kind of what you can do in the passing attack. This is a passing offense. So, this team just drafted 2 receivers. Maybe you go an extra receiver and you only go 3 running backs, considering, last year they had 4. So we'll see kind of how that plays out. I think it's going to come down to special teams. I just don't think that, Tyler's going to be able to give you kind of what Evans does. He gives you some depth at returner if you need it, but, Evans can also get out in space. And, we'll see in camp if Tyler can get out in space and catch the football. Because if he can do that, I think that's going to go a long way to help him get on this roster and kind of make a case. But, in terms of kind of what you can bring, I'm just not sure if Tyler has the chops for that.
Yeah, no, he won't make the roster, but I can't see Evans. I mean, I think they're going to carry 4 backs on the roster. Whether they maybe feel good enough about Chase Brown to move Evans to the practice squad or something, I guess. But, I mean, they've always talked about it specifically in terms of you have to have 4 running backs, especially if, Trayvon's still going to play special teams. I think you're going to carry 4. I'd be really surprised if they didn't. And then I think that they'll eventually find somebody, whether it's Tyler or somebody else, for the practice squad during the season. So if an injury does happen, they won't be sort of caught off guard and not have anybody available to move up.
And like Andrew said, that's another position, obviously, like Mike mentioned. I think I would assume that they would lean towards Trayvon Williams being the kick returner last year, or this year after last year, because he sort of took over for Chris Evans at the end of the year and did decently well. But as we move over to wide receiver, now this is kind of where, I don't want to say it's musical chairs, but there's different ways to go about it. Mostly because you have the addition of Charlie Jones and Andre Yoshivas, along with the fact that it depends on how many receivers they carry on the active roster. I think last year they had 4 during the season, and then they had 7 in the past before last year. So it just kind of depends on the makeup of the roster. But obviously we know Jamar Chase is wide receiver 1, T. Higgins wide receiver 2, Tyler Boyd wide receiver 3. The question is, who will be the lead backup? So in this case, the wide receiver 4. It was Trenton Irwin last year. They elevated him to that, which he earned it after coming off the practice squad when they waived Mike Thomas. And he stepped in for Jamar Chase as the lead backup and did what he had to do, earned the role on the team even after Chase came back. But again, you mentioned Yoshivas, you mentioned Charlie Jones. Like, do you see a position where either, like, how do you think it'll go? Do you think they put Charlie Jones as a backup slot behind Boyd and keep Irwin the wide receiver 4? Or do you think there's a chance that Jones can completely beat out Irwin and be like the lead backup if anybody goes down?
Well, I'm not sure if it's looked at that way. Charlie Jones could be both, and then they could reshuffle it. If Boyd goes down, Jones come in for him, and then Irwin's in the game at the 4th spot. If they do 4 receiver sets, I just look at it in terms of the 53-man roster. I think Morgan and Taylor are going to be battling for that last roster spot at wide receiver. Ahead of the guys, behind the guys that got drafted, that they're going to try to give a little rope to. Andre is a project, and I think they'll give him time to see what they have. But in terms of the 53-man roster, I mean, we know who the starters are. I think Irwin's probably safe, but in terms of Morgan and Trent Taylor, that they're probably looking at, one of those probably is gone. Maybe one's on the practice squad.
Yeah, I think when you look at receiver, you've obviously got the big three, then Charlie Jones is 4, Yoshivas is 5. Presuming that you're going to keep your rookies, you're not going to carry 7. So the back half of receiver depth chart, and obviously injuries can play a part in this too. That kind of goes without being said, but for that, assuming those are your 5, assuming you're going to keep those guys. You got Irwin, you got Taylor, you got Morgan, you got Lassiter. Like that last spot, I think is going to kind of come down to what they're looking for. Stanley Morgan has played special teams too. Are you comfortable carrying, 2 guys who pretty much only can play in the slot? Charlie Jones and Irwin and Taylor. Those guys are not or they're not your prototypical lineup on the outside. Be your outside receivers. They're not going to be the slot guys. So I just think that it depends on, how guys perform in camp. If you like what you see from Yoshivas, maybe you're a little more inclined to keep Irwin or Taylor. But yeah, I think that 6th spot is going to be it's going to be pretty highly contested here in camp.
Yeah, and obviously with Taylor too, the other competition he has to worry about, and this goes hand in hand with I mentioned with Charlie Jones. I mean, it's going to really come down to those two for the punt returner job. So you could see a situation where Taylor maybe gets beat out for a wide receiver spot. And if Jones really looks good in training camp, he can beat him out for the punt returner job. So there's 2 avenues for Taylor, but I'd imagine if he doesn't get one, he might not get the other. So at that point, he might be practice squad compared to last year. So yeah, it's really going to come down to that very, very last spot. I think everyone else is pretty much safe and sound, pending any crazy competitions in training camp. Tight end, obviously, that's a little bit more settled as well. We know it's really going to be Irv Smith Jr. and Drew Sample as your 2 lead tight ends. The question is, and although there's a chance the Bengals could add somebody at the end of August, at the end of the preseason, right now you got Devin Asiasi, and technically for the practice squad, you have Tanner Hudson and Nick Bowers. I'd imagine Hudson is a little bit ahead of Bowers in terms of experience and depth, but I mean, does Asiasi keep that number 3 spot like he had last year, or do you think they really might give Hudson a chance to compete with Asiasi for that 3rd role?
I mean, you're going to give everybody a chance to compete for that, for a bunch of different roles. I just think that, Asiasi, he was with the team last year. Obviously Bowers was too, but, Asiasi was with the team. For what he did, they seemed content with kind of his role as that third tight end. The 3rd tight end in this offense is a bit unique because, I mean, when you're running almost exclusively 3 wide receiver sets, sometimes 4 wide receiver sets, you're just not going to get to your 3rd tight end a lot, unless something has gone terribly wrong. So, I think that, like you said, this probably strikes me as a position of, let's see where we're at on September 1 and see kind of what cuts are and how guys how the rest of rosters are shaking out around the league, like you did with Asiasi last year. But I would lean Asiasi for now, just because I think that you'd rather that institutional knowledge and keep some familiarity there.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. It's your safest bet. And like you said, everyone's getting a chance to compete, but it's a matter of how well can those guys compete? Like, how well can a Tanner Hudson or, like I said, even a Nick Bowers compete with Devin Asiasi? We'll see in training camp, but I think that's really what it's going to boil down to. With left tackle, so obviously Orlando Brown Jr. is your new guy after they shifted Jonah Williams to the right side. I mean, there's really not much to question other than who backs him up. Is it Deontay Smith? Is it Jackson Carman? Obviously, Carman's competing on the right side, so they're going to maybe focus on putting him there. But he also played left tackle last year, in the playoffs when Jonah Williams went down, so he can play left tackle. I'd imagine they'd probably at least – I mean, I think Smith and Carman obviously both make the team, but maybe you have Smith as a left side backup. You keep Carman on the right. I guess, how do you kind of shuffle those two in depth roles?
Well, I think it's less, positional specific and more just like number of offensive linemen, I think probably Deontay Smith would be the sort of odd man out in terms of like practice squad player.
Right.
Because Jaxson Carman's got some flexibility to go inside. Cody Ford has played multiple positions. I feel like, he was behind Hakeem Adeniji all last season. Hakeem's probably going to have to fight as well, especially if they keep Leal Collins. So I would say, Adeniji and Smith are probably at risk just because they don't have position flexibility. And if they keep Collins, they're probably not going to need all those tackles. Whether they keep all those guys on the practice squad or not, I'm not sure. Jaxson Kirkland could have a say in that, depending on how well the Washington offensive lineman that they signed, who also has sort of positional flexibility, could play inside, has played outside in college. Do they want a younger guy to see? Is his upside higher than a Hakeem Adeniji, who you've had for quite a bit and hasn't really shown much improvement? So I think that's where you look at in terms of the 53-man roster. You're looking at sort of overall numbers and not sort of position specific.
Yeah, I mean, you got Brown, Volson, Karras, Kappa, Williams, those five. I mean, those guys are going to make the team. Then you would assume Leal Collins makes the team at this point. There's six. And then you've got some interesting conversations to have. Kind of like Mike said, I think at tackle, you're probably, if you're only a tackle, you're probably the odd man out. I think you kind of look to Deontay Smith in that regard. Just because you've got Orlando Brown, you've got Jonah Williams, you've got Leal Collins. I mean, those three, assuming those are your top three tackles, Jackson Carman's in there too. Like, if anything happens to Orlando Brown, there's Jaxson Carman at left tackle, or maybe you feel more comfortable with Jonah going back to left tackle. But you can't just carry those guys. You can't just have depth at tackle. So, if those five are your starters and then Leal and Jackson are your reserves, I mean, you need some depth on the inside. I think, Mike was right. Jaxson Kirkland is going to have a shot. Trey Hill was their backup center last year. I think, people are, people might not be aware just because he kind of fell off the face of the earth after he got hurt. But Ben Brown, he was a depth center for them last year. At least he's listed as a center. He's a guy who can come in. He was signed as an undrafted free agent at this time a year ago. I just think that, there's going to be a battle there. You need somebody to back up. Karras. So it's going to be a number crunch. I mean, Sharping's probably got a good shot, just considering he can play inside. Adeniji can play inside. Ford can play inside. But there's going to be a couple notable names that are on the waiver wire at roster cutdown day on the offensive line.
Yeah, I think obviously from most vulnerable to least vulnerable, I mean, Deontay Smith is really the most vulnerable because he's strictly a tackle. He never really played inside. He's kind of a failed project, I think. They expected more out of him when they drafted him 2 years ago. Hasn't really met those expectations. Unless he proves himself in camp, this might be his last chance. And then, of course, Adeniji has a better chance because he has played inside. He started in the playoffs last year and the year before, but we saw how things went, obviously, in that final stretch of the playoffs against guys like Chris Jones, among others. So he's going to have to fight for that. And yeah, Jaxson Kirkland makes things very interesting because obviously he's 6'7". He's played tackle, but I think he primarily played inside, like Mike said. So he has a chance to compete to have a depth throw on the inside. But obviously, I think for the most part, guys like Ted Karras for sure is good, but like the Trey Hills and the Max Sharpings and those names, I think those guys they're pretty set. I think those guys would be good as long as they do their job in training camp. And I guess really, and you could say whoever doesn't win out that right tackle job, which is really bloated, like we said, I'd imagine that would be your swing tackle. So say Jonah Williams is your right tackle, then maybe you make Leal Collins your swing tackle. I think that would make sense, right? Just kind of have him, the lead backup right tackle, as your swing tackle, because that's kind of what they did last year with Adeniji, since he was the lead backup right tackle.
Right, and it just depends on. I mean, does Leal Collins have to go on the PUP list? Is he going to be able to to perform, and that can obviously change the math here too. I mean, when do you expect him back? When do you expect him to be full strength? I know, when we talked to him a couple of weeks ago, he kind of seemed, pretty optimistic. He seemed, he seemed very, he seemed in good spirits, I should say, about kind of his progress and kind of where he was at. He talked about doing pass sets, and I mean, this was a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know. Is he able to come back? If he's not, then you certainly need, another tackle, or maybe you can add an Adeniji there because he can play tackle and guard. There's a lot of moving of parts here and a lot of variables. So I think there's a couple different factors at play here too.
Yeah, I think that really, and that's the thing, we're not truly going to know who is going to be on that 53-man roster for at least another 3.5 months, but the focus is kind of who's the most vulnerable and where do you see the most movement, and I think that kind of sums it up there on the offensive line, because, again, much like last year, a lot of battles, if not more battles in training camp this year. When we come back, we're going to obviously flip things on the defensive side of the ball, look at the biggest positional battles, which will primarily be in the defensive backfield, what that means, what that could look like, and much more. But before we do that, I want to remind you guys to sign up for our Cincinnati Football Insider Subtext service I meant to mention earlier. It's $4.99 a month, but it's a free trial to start. It's a 2-week free trial to start. You can cancel anytime. You might not like me. You might not like Mike. You might not like Andrew. I think you'll like us. I'd like to think we're very fun, likable people. But if you don't like us, you can text stop anytime. We text you, the listener, the reader, however you want to describe yourself, everything and anything you need to know about the Bengals before Twitter, before the internet, before the podcast even knows about it, because that's what you get for being a special member of Cincinnati Football Insider. And guys, I mean, I'm saying it's special, but to you guys, why is it important for people to know how special Cincinnati Football Insider is? Either of you guys, Mike, Andrew, what is so enthusiastic to you guys about this subtext service we have?
Well, I think, now you can kind of cut the line of Twitter. You don't have to worry about kind of scrolling through a bunch of different feeds. You get it sent right to your phone. The news that you would want, we're kind of reaching that time of year where, news is going to start to happen quicker and quicker. We do have a little bit of a lull here, but, as we start to slowly ramp up for training camp, you're going to get to hear news about Burrow's extension. You're going to get to hear roster moves. You're going to get to hear all that kind of stuff. OTAs are coming up, and I just think it's probably your most effective way to hear about the Bengals and hear about the team you like.
And analysis too, based on what we see from, when they open up training camp and things like that. Practice will be there and give you the kind of the front row view of what's going on.
Doesn't get better than that. Again, go to cleveland.com/Bengals to sign up. We'll be right back on the Strictly Stripes podcast. All right, thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we looked at the offensive side of the depth chart, did a little reset as far as what that would look like for a 53-man cutdown heading into training camp and beyond. We're going to do the same with the defense, and I think it's going to be a lot lighter, and it's really mostly going to be in the defensive backfield, which is where I want to start. We talked about it a little bit. I want to sort of elaborate on this some more. Really, I think the question is what happens at safety, of course, both free safety and strong safety. We know who's replacing Jesse Bates and Von Bell. We just don't quite exactly certainly know how they're going to be replaced. I'd imagine free safety is all Dax Hill. I think they groomed him for a year, playing a depth role, mostly in the slot. I think you put him in that slot position as a free safety. And then behind him in whatever order, you have Mike Thomas and Tyson Anderson. Now, the real question that I think is worth talking about is that strong safety. I think there is a little bit of a battle to be had for Nick Scott. I don't know that he is guaranteed that job, but I'd imagine he's a front runner as far as the battle goes, and literally and figuratively, he'll be battling with Jordan Battle. So, I mean, I guess the first question is how much of a contest, I'm not going to say battle because that'd be cliche at that point, how much of a contest is there going to be between Nick Scott and Jordan Battle for the right to be the starting strong safety?
Well, I think that's kind of one of those. Positions I mentioned, quarterback. That that the quarterback feels truly wide open. I don't think safety is truly wide open. That feels like Nick Scott's job to lose. Jordan Battle would have to come in and be really, really good, or Nick Scott would kind of have to not be everything that they thought he would be. So, I think that, those three obviously are going to make the team: Dax Hill, Nick Scott, Jordan Battle. And then that fourth spot is probably going to come down to Michael Thomas and Tyson Anderson, if I had to guess. It depends on what you like there. I mean, are you okay with, do you want some veteran leadership back there with Michael Thomas, special teams captain, guy who's well respected in the locker room? Do you want that, to kind of hold over a safety who was drafted in the first round, but didn't really play a lot last year, a guy who's coming in new from another team, a rookie? Like, are you okay with putting Tyson Anderson back there with that kind of level of youth? Or, do you want kind of more of a veteran voice? Or maybe you want to carry 5 safeties. I don't know. Maybe that's how it shakes out with special teams. So I think that the battle truly, is going to be between Thomas and Anderson. But I think Nick Scott kind of has the inside track here pretty significantly to a week 1 start. That doesn't mean it's going to happen all year long, but I think week 1, Nick Scott has a really good chance to be the starter.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see them going with a full rookie safety core. I just think that'd be really a lot of pressure for them. Basically never having played a snap, especially, with Dax Hill, playing out of position most of last year. I just think that'd be a really uphill battle. Like you said, I can see Jordan Battle taking more snaps or taking snaps away from Nick Scott later in the season. That's not to say that he won't be prepared day one or, have a good feel for it. I just think it's going to be hard. A lot to ask, just given that there's almost a rookie on the other side, essentially.
And I think you can use Jordan Battle in certain packages. Like, I know we kind of talked about what do you do with Trey Flowers, his role now that he's gone. Maybe you bring him in those situations. Maybe you have some packages where you go cover 6 and you need an extra safety. I mean, he'll still have a role on this defense, but I think, like you guys said, it'd be too much to ask of him to be part of a starting role. So that would make the most sense to me. So I think that really just kind of shakes out the safety room. Cornerback room is pretty much set, really pending, the status of Chidobe Awuzie, and if he's able to start in week 1. Maybe that's the case, maybe not. We'll get a better idea with, workouts in training camp with where his health is at. I guess the question is, if he's not ready for week 1, do you see a situation where DJ Turner starts in his place, or do you kind of move him in a backup nickel role and maybe expect Sidney Jones to kind of step up with Cam Taylor-Britt? Like, how do you maybe look at that in a situation where Chidobe's not ready?
You'd probably
you probably go with the veteran.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Cheeto seems like a player that wouldn't sort of lie about his status. He seems very optimistic about it. He's not putting a date in terms of like fall camp. His focus is on that week 1 spot. Whether he's athletically 100%, we don't know, but we won't know. But I think he'll be in a good shape to be able to start week 1, just based on how so far he's had no sort of hiccups in his rehab. And, is in a good spot, I think, right now.
Yeah, I think that's the idealistic. Well, I mean, realistically, like you said, I think based on what he said, it makes sense. That's a realistic path forward. But even then, do you see just Sidney Jones kind of being the lead backup? And then maybe they use DJ Turner the same way they used Dax Hill last year as kind of that backup additional corner, inside corner? Like, how do you guys kind of see his role shaping out?
Well, no, I mean, I think that's why you have Jalen Davis. Mike Hilton is going to be your nickel corner. He's going to be the guy that plays in the slot. He's obviously really, really talented at a lot of different things from that spot. And then you have Jalen Davis right behind him. And if you keep 6 corners, that leaves room for Cheeto, Cam Taylor-Britt, DJ Turner, and Sidney Jones. And maybe DJ Ivy's a practice squad guy. You still have Alan George there. It's just, you can't carry 7-8 corners on a roster, unless you feel really, really good about your depth elsewhere. And I just think that, Turner is going to kind of play that fourth corner role. You would lean veteran with Sidney Jones, like Mike said, and then, maybe as he progresses. I mean, Lou Anarumo talked about this. He doesn't really like to rotate his corners. He likes them being on the field all the time. So this kind of feels like a little bit of a development year for DJ Turner until it's not. We saw that with Cam Taylor-Britt, where they were starting to work him in. I think they put him in when that Falcons game was like 21-0 or 28-0 or whatever score that was. So that you can start to do that with DJ Turner, but I think from the start you have to lean Sidney Jones is there. But the cornerback room, like you said, feels pretty set.
Yeah, I think you spoke on the depth there. That really shakes it out. Really, linebackers pretty much set. Like, you still have Jermaine Pratt for a couple more years. You got Logan Wilson playing the weak side, Jermaine Pratt in the middle. And then in the Sam, if you have certain formations at Sam linebacker, you have Hakeem Davis-Gaither and Marcus Bailey. The question is, so you still have a Joe Bacci as well, who I'd imagine will be the main guy behind Logan Wilson. Well, technically, Davis, Gaither, and Bailey would be behind Wilson or Pratt, but behind them, you have Joe Bacci. He's back for another year. Really good special teams piece, which I think is a big reason why they added him. You still need at least one more backup spot, though, because you don't have Clay Johnston. That door's pretty much closed on him. It doesn't seem like he's coming back. So it really comes down to either Jalen Moody or Shaka Hayward, two undrafted free agents who joined the Bengals recently after the draft. I mean, between those two, I know we haven't really seen much from either of them, but I mean, do you lean one way or the other with one guy to be that additional backup linebacker?
Say it again.
I'm saying with Shaka Hayward and Jalen Moody, like one of those two guys, I'd imagine will make the team to fill Clay Johnston's spot because Johnston's not there. Like, do you lean one way or the other with one of those guys, or do you just kind of have to wait and see until training camp?
Well, I like Hayward. I think he'd be a good special teams addition. But obviously it'll be a competition. But I could see him, carrying him on the practice squad. They have pretty decent depth, and they're going to have a bunch of special teams players now with all the guys that they drafted in the secondary too. So they don't necessarily need an extra linebacker, but Shaka Hayward would probably get I think have the inside track.
Yeah, I know. I think you and I talked about him a little bit, or I think you asked Zach Taylor about him the other day, and so I think he has a lot of upside to him, just kind of from what I've seen, just with what little I've seen, obviously, because he's an undrafted free agent. But yeah, I mean, if he really shows out in practice and training camp, then yeah, I think he could be sort of your Clay Johnston and take that spot. Obviously, you still have Keandre Jones as well. He was practice squad last year. He'll compete with him as well, but who knows? If it's not Keandre Jones, it could be Shaka Hayward. If not either of them, Jalen Moody. But to just sort of wrap up here up front, really not much to look at here other than really two things. The first thing is with Myles Murphy, he's going to be a backup behind Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. We know that. How he's used, specific third downs, we don't know for certain. It seems to be that's kind of what they implied with how they'll use him. I guess the other question is, we talked a little bit about this sort of with our winners and losers on the defense after the draft, but I guess the question is there a situation where you keep Cam Sample and Joseph Ossai and Jeff Gunter and Terrell Basham? Because that's a lot of defensive ends to keep. I'd imagine one of them has to go to the practice squad, Gunter being, I'd say Gunter's the most vulnerable out of those guys. How do you sort of seeing it shaking out on both sides of the defensive line with edge rusher?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you're talking specifically edge rusher, I mean, you got Hubbard, Murphy, Hendrickson, and Ossai. There's four. When you add in Reeder and Hill, there's six. You're probably going to carry. I mean, for a team that runs 4 down linemen, you're probably going to carry 8, 9. So you're only talking there's 2 or 3 spots available. I mean, you need a backup for DJ Reeder and BJ Hill. So there's Tupou, there's Tufele, there's Carter. Like, do you probably take 2 of those guys, and then maybe you take a third defensive end, or maybe you're okay with having kind of 2 across the board, 2 deep across the board. You have a backup defensive end, backup defensive tackle at every spot, and I mean, that would spell bad news for a guy like Terrell Basham. That would spell bad news for Cam Sample. There's options there, but if you want to take that third defensive end spot, like let's say you go Hubbard, Reeder, Hill, Hendrickson as your starters, Murphy, Ossai, Tupou, Carter as 8. I mean, it's going to come down to, do you want another end or do you want another interior player? I think you would probably lean end in that case, just because, we've seen on third downs, Hendrickson and Hubbard have, played in 3 techs and things like that. They've kind of shifted inside, and you can bring another guy off the bench. That kind of screams Miles Murphy to me. So, I mean, it's going to come down to Cam Sample, Jeff Gunter, Terrell Basham. So it's that's going to be another interesting battle too. And, I think special teams might have a part in that. If any one of those guys can play special teams, then they'll probably have a little bit of a better shot. But again, it's a numbers game with a lot of these guys, and it's not going to be an easy decision.
Yeah, I agree that they will all make it. There'll be some cuts. You go with the guy. I mean, and all those guys got some years on them. What is Gunter the newest one in terms of age?
He was last year 7th round pick. Yeah.
Yeah. So Gunter maybe gets an edge that way. I'd have a hard time seeing them all make the 53-man roster.
Yeah, I think, and obviously, like you said, Gunter would be the most vulnerable. I think Basham has a chance just because he's a veteran and he's played for so many teams. And I mean, you would know the answer to this injury. This is his 7th season, right? Or is it his 8th season? 7th? 2017.
He got drafted in 17, so
it would be his 7th season. Yeah.
No, this would be 17, 18, 19, 20, 21.
17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Yeah, we can do basic math.
There we go.
Yeah, it would be a 7th season. So, yeah, there you have that. And, of course, yeah, with Jay Tufele, I mean, he was on the practice squad a bunch last year. I know he played a little bit more because he played alongside Zach Carter when DJ Reader got hurt, and they had to give BJ Hill a few breaks on some sets. But, yeah, I think you can always move him. You still have Dominique Davis on the practice squad as well. I think he only played 1 game last year, so that's a guy that's pretty much set for the practice squad. But, yeah, that, I think, is going to be the most interesting battle on defensive line is out of those 3, who gets that sort of final spot? And how does that sort of, shape things out? We'll have to see. It's a numbers game. It could affect the interior as well. I mean, punter is pretty much set. I'd imagine it's Brad Robbins' job to lose, like we said. Evan McPherson's not going anywhere. Cal Adamitis is not going anywhere. And like I said, with punt returner, it could come down to Trent Taylor. It could come down to Charlie Jones. I lean Jones because I don't think they sounded very confident in Trent Taylor at the combine when they talked about his performance. And I think Jones is younger with a lot of juice. So I think it's his to lose, but Taylor still has a shot at the same time. And that pretty much recaps that. Stay with us Tuesday. We're going to hear from the myth, the man. Well, he's not really a myth. He's a human being like us. He's immortal. The man, Joe Burrow, is going to speak for the first time since the Bengals lost in the AFC Championship game. So almost 3.5, 4 months since we last heard from Joey B himself. Of course, a lot to catch up on with him and what he has to say, and more questions, not necessarily resetting the roster, but questions about other positions across the board that we'll break down this week. Plus, we'll have some special guest interviews like I mentioned last week. I promise those will be good. We'll even have one of those tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Enjoy your Monday.